Hey, I'm Melanie Trailer, and today we are talking about thread. So I wanted to have a big thread chat, and I wanted to basically tell you every thread I use and every instance I would use it for. So we're all right, we'll start with piecing, and for piecing I use Superior So Fine thread. It's 50 weight. I almost exclusively use it in white. If I do have it in a softer gray color that I use when I'm working with darker fabrics, but for the most part I almost exclusively use the white because I usually work with lighter fabrics. But I have had no problem with this thread. Like I said, I only ever piece with it the majority of the time. It's a polyester thread, so it's going to have a little bit less dust than cotton thread, but it's still going to have dust. But it is a pretty strong thread, and I like it. I don't like it for anything but piecing, though. It's 50 weight is perfect size for piecing, but when it comes to like free motion and stuff, I wouldn't use it for that. And I've actually got an example of free motioning with it. So this is a quilt, and let me try to get it. I've got some darker backing on here. All right, so this is the So Fine in the bobbin, and I forgot to change the bobbin is what happened, so I ended up having to do the whole thing in this thread. And while there's nothing wrong with it, it's thick. It's thicker than, say, something like the Polylite, which I'll be showing you in a minute. So I just don't care for thick thread on the back of my quilts as far as free motioning goes, and it kind of just really shows up as that white. It doesn't blend. I'm just not a fan of that. So like I said, I had made an accident. I meant to take it out of the bobbin and then didn't, so it was a whoopsie. Right here is an example of some piecing with that thread, and you know, like I said, I have no complaints about it. So that's what I use for piecing. Let me show it to you on my sewing machine. All right, here's my Juki, and I have one spool of it for my top thread, and then I have one spool of it in my bobbin thread. I've got the two spools up here so that I don't ever have to undo my top to wind my bobbin. I'm a one bobbin winder at a time. So I've got it looking like that. I do get asked a lot about the stitch length and stuff like that, so I thought I'd show it to you real quick. I always piece with the 2. When I'm free motioning, I'll bump up to a 3, but that is with any thread. But with piecing any thread, I use a 2. And there's my tension. And I've got my, I don't know if you can see it, it's not sharpening up, the screen isn't, but I've got my tension also on the 2. This was going to be different per machine. So in the shop, we have So Fine in this cone, which is, you know, you get more bang for your buck by buying the cone. Sometimes sewing machines don't allow for a cone, but you can buy a separate cone holder that if you wanted to. We also have it in just the spools too. So let me take you over there and show you our spools. All right, so we have these spools. They look like that. The spools have 550 yards, and the cones have 3,280 yards. I think these are twice the price of the spools. I want to say around about, but you get way more bang for your buck, like I mentioned, for the cone. It just kind of depends, though, if your machine allows for a cone or if you want to buy that separate cone holder, whatever. We have this cone size in, I think, 2 different colors, the gray and the white that I always use. We have the spools in a little bit more colors. Like I think this is champagne. So we have more colors of the spools. Okay, let's move on to free motion quilting. I have a lot of favorites for free motion quilting. I have some old favorites and I have some new favorites. And when it comes to free motion quilting, I want to say this. I don't want to quilt with a 50 weight thread, period. I don't like the look of it. Now that is definitely a preference thing, because you could quilt with that so fine just fine and it looked nice. But for me, I just don't want it to be, I just don't want my thread to be that thick. Also, so fine has a matte look to it, while a lot of the other threads I use for free motion have this shimmer to them that I think is just really pretty. So this is my current favorite, I would say, the one I probably use the most of. This is Polylite from Sulky. We have it in the shop in many colors because, like I said, this is a favorite, so I use this often in my top thread. It is also a polyester thread. It is 60 weight, I want to say, so not that much a smaller thread than the so fine, but enough to make a difference. Let me show it to you on a quilt. So here is that ecru color that I just shown you on a quilt used as free motion, and you can see that shimmer to it. I mean, to me, it's just so much difference than the so fine used, and I just think it's just really lovely. So that is the Polylite. An old favorite of mine is Microquilter. I love Microquilter. I have a lot of uses for Microquilter, but one of the things I use Microquilter as far as free motion goes is I use it in my bobbin. Always, like no matter what thread that I quilt on the top with, I use Microquilter in silver, this color right here, in my bobbin. And the reason that I like it in my bobbin is because it disappears. Sometimes what I'm using on the quilt back doesn't match the quilt front. Sometimes I've got a whole, well, almost always I've got a whole scrappy look going on, and if I used a particular color, it may not match every fabric in the quilt. So by using a silver tends to blend with all colors, so it kind of just looks like, you know, it's just almost invisible. And Microquilter is 100 weight thread. Now you really have to adjust your tension to use this thread, or at least I did on my sewing machines, but I was able to adjust it on the Juki when I free motion with it, or more often than not I free motion on my Bernina. I had to adjust the tension by quite a bit, so I usually sew with my tension at 3.75, and to use this thread I had to bring it all the way down to the 3. So that was quite a big adjustment, and what happens is it just constantly breaks, and then you know you need to change your tension to make it work. Sometimes it's the needle, but more often than not I find it's just the tension. So anytime I sew with this as the top thread, which is not very often, but sometimes I do, and I'll put my tension at the 3. But if I just use this in my bobbin, I don't need to change any tension. So that's kind of how I normally use it in my bobbin, but a lot of times I will use it to sew the top too if I don't want the quilting stealing the show. So another thing that, since this is so thin, I like to use it with my binding. So I don't want to sew my binding onto the quilt with this thread because, like I said, it is so thin. I usually use my sew fine for that. But when it comes to hand doing it, I will use this if I'm doing traditional hand binding. I also use this when I'm doing my ditch binding, which is a machine binding method. Because this thread is so thin, it really disappears into that ditch and becomes pretty much invisible. Another thing that I use this thread for is applique. So I exclusively applique, or hidden stitches, I applique with this. So when I'm sewing my quilt label onto the back of my quilt, I stitch it with this thread because this thread disappears. We have this in a handful of colors, but and we have the cones and the spools as well. This is also a great thread if you were stitching in the ditch and you wanted it to disappear. So this is kind of like a hidden thread to me. The 100 weight is so thin. All right, so here is a quilt that I used Microquilter in the bobbin. And you can see how thin that is compared to that first quilt I showed you. But it just kind of, and I'm also using the silver color, and you can see that this is a really, really colorful background, and that silver color just kind of looks great no matter which color it's over. You know, if I was using a very, very dark background, I might swap to a darker gray thread, or a darker silver thread. But anytime I'm using just something like this, or even light colored fabric, it shows up as kind of almost white in light colored fabric, so it really doesn't matter what color I use, that silver always works. But this this is just meander quilting, so this quilting is nothing special, but I usually quilt really densely on my quilts, and that again is probably one of the reasons why I prefer the thinner threads for the bobbin, because denser quilting, you know, is kind of, you saw my quilting on the back with the so fine thread, and that just kind of looked a little bit too much, while this one, you know, it looks a lot better. So I normally remember to put my microquilter in my bobbin. All right, and just to show you this too, this is, I used the microquilter on the label right here at the top, and you cannot see those stitches. I mean, you can tell where they indent at, but you can't really see the stitches. So that's one of the reasons why I like microquilter so much for applique. All right, we have microquilter, like I said, in spools and cones and in a variety of colors. So the next thread I wanted to show you is a new favorite. This is Kimono silk. This is a very expensive thread, or expensive to me anyway. It's about twice as much as, you know, I would pay for this one. So kind of pricey, but it's so pretty. I mean, it is so pretty. It is also a 100-weight thread. Let me find one that's open. All right, so here's one that is open. And this, again, like I said, 100-weight thread. It is silk, just pure silk. So the Kimono silk is also by Superior Threads, and it comes in a variety of colors. And we've got quite a bit of colors, or I don't know if I say quite a bit, maybe we've got 5 or 6 shades of this Kimono silk, because I'm loving it so much and I just want more and more of it. It always comes in these muddier colors though that I really like, so I've been using it a lot on my quilts. Let me find a quilt with it. Okay, here is a quilt that I use the Kimono silk thread in, and I just really like it. It's not as glimmery as the Polylite, but it is just so lovely. I would never use it in my bobbin because, like I said, the price tag, but on the top of the quilt, I just really like it, and I like the colors of it, and I'm just smitten. And let's see, it has 1,090 yards. So I think I've used this, I want to say I've used this on like 1 to 2 quilts. I know I used this one for this quilt here. This is a 70 by 70, and you can see that I used maybe half the spool, maybe a little bit more than half the spool. So not terrible. All right, so that is the Kimono silk. Okay, I'm taking you to my personal stash of thread. This is where I keep my pearl cotton balls, and pearl cotton balls look like this. These are the DMC brand. They're number 8 thread, so it's a really, really thick thread. And the purpose of this thread is to show it off. So you would never, you know, sew with something this big to hide, obviously. This is I want you to see it thread. I use this thread most of the time. I'm using it for my binding when I do chunky stitches. I'll pop up a picture of the chunky stitch binding. But this thread is going to pop against anything. I've also used this thread for embroidery a lot. So anytime I'm embroidering it, I use it there. I don't have that many in my personal ones because I kind of just get them from the shop when I need them. Let me show you what we have for the shop. All right, so I got this kind of mixed in with my own personal stuff, but this is what we have for DMC as far as the shop goes. We have all of these colors. Oh, that one's only got one. They come in these little boxes like this, and we sell them by the ball. I can get 3 or 4 quilts done with a single ball. So, or as far as throw size quilts go, and I mostly make, throw size quilts, but just they go a lot further than you think they're gonna go. They have 87 yards on them. So the one ball, packs a lot. So we have all of these colors and all of these colors. Sorry about the light. We just have so many colors, so many different shades. Sometimes I like to do high contrast for my binding, and sometimes I kind of like it to blend. Let me show you one that blends. I pulled a big pile of quilts to show you. But this is a quilt where the binding kind of blends in. That is that chunky stitch, and I didn't make a high contrast going on it. It just kind of is a very subtle look to it, and I really, really like that. Let me show you high contrast. Okay, so here is more of a high contrast. You can see that I'm using a dark fabric for my binding and a very pale peachy pink thread for this stitch. And I mean, I like it both ways. I can see a reason for doing both of them. I think I kind of like it when it blends a little bit better instead of being high contrast, but I've liked both on different occasions, so I guess that comes down to preferences for each quilt or whatever kind of look you're going for. I like to use this on all of my pillows. I like to use it on all of my runners or things that you see a lot of. I also wanted to show you, let me see if I can get some light into this closet. Let me get these orphan blocks. I've got a bunch of orphan blocks here. And I wanted to show you what the DMC number 8 looks like when you embroider it. Or what it can look like. So that is just a bunch of different stitches in black of that thread. Just I kind of outlined the letters and then I kind of filled them in with the thread. This actually took a really long time. I've been sitting on this for probably 10 years not knowing what to do with it, but there is the embroidery look. I use the thread for every bit of embroidery. I hate the floss that has that they come just kind of with the little stickers wrapping around it. I do not like that floss. I don't like separating it. I don't like anything about it. So when it comes to embroidery, I always use the ball because, again, the ball doesn't, you don't have to separate it when you're doing embroidery or anything like that. It's just one single thread, and it's probably the equivalent of the floss untorn apart, like unseparated. So we have all those colors available that I showed you just a few minutes ago of the pearl cotton balls. So we have a lot of colors. I like to keep a lot of colors in the shop, and I'm constantly trying to add a few more. If you're ever wanting a color that we don't have, just shoot me an email. I'm happy to add that color to our stock. Just to pop this in here while I'm right over here. This is how I keep my thread stored in these drawers with spice rack organizers. So they're both like that. And then I've got a warm drawer and a cool drawer. One more thread I want to show you, and this is bottom line. This is the only thread I would use for English paper piecing. I have tried all the threads, and this one is the one I tried that I said, oh, this is it, the very first time. And also the one I came back to after I tried some other threads that after I was told that were good, also good for EPP. This one is definitely my favorite. I almost always use it in the silver, but if I'm working with dark fabrics, again, I would go to the dark gray. So what is so good about this thread for English paper piecing, you might ask? This is a 60 weight thread, so it's a little bit thinner than, something you might piece with. It's made of polyester, and it's a little bit more of a stronger polyester. So it has I always call it a bounce to it. When I pull it, when I'm hand piecing and I pull it through, I can pull it pretty tight without breaking the thread. So that's something that polyester gives you over cotton strength. Here is some examples of the bottom line in use. Let me see if I can get this. So you can barely see those stitches. And here is the actual thread. So pretty thin, slight shimmer to it. Mostly matte though, definitely way more matte than that Sulky thread. But it is not completely matte. Like I said, 60 weight is just a great EPP thread. It's the only thing I use this thread for is EPP. It is more, the price of this one is a lot more than some of the other spools I've shown you today. I think I want to say it's around $10 a spool. But I have been EPPing for like, I want to say 8 years, and I'm still on my very first spool. If that tells you anything, it lasts forever. And I've made 2 full English paper pieced quilts, and I've also made a lot of side projects with my English paper piecing. Okay, so just a quick recap of what I've shown you and what I've talked about. For piecing, I only use So Fine, a 50 weight thread. I like 50 weight threads in my piecing. I don't think I've tried 40 and 30 weight. I inherited a bunch of my grandmother's 30 weight threads, and I don't like them. The thicker the thread, the harder it is to get precision. So I like the 50 for that reason. There's a lot of different 50 weight threads on the market too. So if you wanted to try different brands from me, I would encourage you to do that. But the 50 weight is what I have found 50 weight to be really great for piecing. It doesn't hinder you in any way. For free motion quilting, I showed you the Microquilter, the Polylite by Sulky, and I showed you the Kimono silk. Those are all between 60 and 100 weight, and I like that range for my free motion quilting. Not just for free motion quilting, for straight line quilting too. I like that range for all quilting, and I prefer to use a shimmery, a thread with like a glossy look to it versus the matte. Just because it's an extra. Quilting is an extra you do on top of the thread, so I feel like it's okay for it to be a little bit more than what you're piecing with. Piecing with basic and showing off with quilting. The Microquilter I can also use for all applique, and I use it for in my machine binding as well. So let me just say this just to make sure you understood when I was doing the video. I would never sew my binding on with the Microquilter. I don't feel like it would, I don't know that there would be anything wrong with it, but I would worry that it wasn't as strong because it's 100 weight. So, but I would finish the binding. I would sew the binding in the ditch with that thread because it disappears, and I think it would look really nice. It's what I always do on my own. Let me pop up a picture of machine binding right here. And you can see the stitches within the ditch, or kind of see them. That is Microquilter. Okay, the DMC number 8 thread, I like that again for my chunky binding and for embroidery. I also like, I meant to say this too, I also like the DMC number 8 for hand quilting. So if I'm doing hand quilting and I want it to pop, like chunky stitches, then I would use the number 8 for that as well. I don't use it for anything else. I can't think of another thing you might use it for, but you might have something. Obviously it won't go in your machine, but oh, and let me say this, when I use it with a Sashiko needle. That's a really big needle with a really big eye, and you won't have no problem getting that thick thread in that big eye versus a small needle trying to get it in there. And then I think the last thread I showed you was bottom line, and I use that exclusively for EPP. I don't use it for anything else. I like it because of the bounce. Okay, I think that is all. If you have any thread tips or anything like that, put them in the comments. There's no wrong answers. We all have our preferences and everybody is entitled to them. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching.